The image is iconic, burned into the collective consciousness of the digital age. A grainy, handheld video of a man standing on a pier, shaking his head in disbelief as he stares out at the horizon, claiming with absolute, unwavering conviction that the sea is perfectly flat. It is a moment that feels almost like a glitch in the matrix, a sudden, jarring reminder that in an era of unprecedented scientific advancement, where we map the genomes of extinct species and transmit high-definition video from the surface of Mars, there exists a vocal, fervent, and rapidly growing movement that rejects the very shape of the world beneath our feet. We live in an age where the truth feels increasingly subjective, where algorithms curate our realities and echo chambers reinforce our biases, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the resurgence of the Flat Earth movement. What began as a niche curiosity in the forgotten corners of early internet forums has exploded into a global cultural phenomenon, a digital wildfire fueled by YouTube rabbit holes, charismatic influencers, and a deep-seated distrust of institutional authority. But why now? Why, in the 21st century, are people looking at the same evidence that convinced the ancient Greeks of a spherical Earth and choosing to see a stationary, disc-shaped plane? To understand this, we must look beyond the memes and the mockery. We are not just exploring a pseudoscientific claim, we are embarking on a deep-dive investigation into the nature of human belief, the psychology of conspiracy, and the scientific methods that have allowed humanity to move from wandering hunter-gatherers to voyagers of the cosmos. This documentary is not a simple exercise in debunking. It is a rigorous, evidence-based exploration of the spherical reality that defines our existence. Over the next hour, we will strip away the layers of misinformation, dissect the flawed logic, and re-examine the fundamental proofs that have stood the test of millennia. We will stand on the shoulders of giants like Eratosthenes, whose shadow-based calculations thousands of years ago still hold up today, and we will look to the modern marvels of satellite technology and deep space imaging that provide constant, irrefutable confirmation of our planet's curvature. But we will also ask the uncomfortable questions. How did we get here? How did the digital architecture of the internet facilitate the spread of this geometric denial? And what happens when a community's identity becomes so intertwined with a single, demonstrably false claim that reality itself begins to feel like a threat? We are living in a post-truth landscape, and the Flat Earth movement is perhaps the most visceral example of the challenges we face in distinguishing objective reality from comfortable fiction. The history of our understanding of the Earth is not merely a chronicle of scientific discovery. It is a narrative of human curiosity and the daring to observe the world without prejudice. The ancient Greeks did not arrive at a spherical Earth because they were following a political agenda or trying to hide a divine truth. They arrived there because the evidence demanded it. They watched the stars shift as they traveled north to south, noting how different constellations emerged and vanished. They observed the circular shadow cast by the Earth on the Moon during lunar eclipses, a celestial event that happens with rhythmic precision, predictable down to the second. They understood that if the world were flat, the geometry of shadows, the behavior of celestial bodies, and the way objects disappear over the horizon would be fundamentally different. And yet, this modern movement ignores this foundational geometry, often citing their own limited, anecdotal observations as superior to the systematic, peer-reviewed accumulation of thousands of years of human intelligence. We must understand that this is not a battle of intelligence, it is a battle of epistemological frameworks. When a proponent of the flat Earth claims that the horizon always rises to eye level, they are not necessarily being dishonest, they are misinterpreting a complex interaction between atmospheric refraction, the limitations of the human eye, and the curvature of the Earth itself. The atmosphere is not a vacuum, and the way light bends as it travels through layers of varying density and temperature can create optical illusions that have puzzled observers for centuries. By isolating these phenomena from the broader context of physics, the flat Earth movement creates a closed loop of logic where every observation is twisted to fit a preordained conclusion. It is a psychological trap, one that starts with a kernel of distrust and expands until it encompasses the entirety of scientific endeavor. Consider the sheer scale of the conspiracy required to maintain the flat Earth illusion. It would involve not only every space agency on the planet but every airline pilot, every ship captain, every geologist, every surveyor, and every meteorologist. It would require the total complicity of thousands of independent nations, many of which are locked in intense geopolitical rivalries, all working in perfect, unbroken, and centuries-long unison to hide the shape of the world. The logical fallacy here is staggering, yet it is often brushed aside with the vague assertion that there is a hidden hand controlling the narrative. This is the cornerstone of all conspiratorial thinking, the belief that the world is far more organized and sinister than it actually is. It is, in a strange way, more comforting to believe in a grand, controlled design than to accept the chaotic, indifferent, and vast reality of a sphere hurtling through space. As we move forward, we will investigate the specific, tangible arguments used to prop up this movement. We will look at the concept of gravity, or, as flat earthers prefer to call it, density and buoyancy, and we will see how these physical forces are fundamentally misunderstood. We will analyze the photographs from space, not just as static images, but as the culmination of intricate engineering and mathematical mastery. We will hear from researchers who have spent years engaging with the community, and we will try to understand the thin line between healthy skepticism, which is the engine of all scientific progress, and the corrosive cynicism that characterizes this movement. There is a profound difference between questioning authority based on evidence and rejecting reality because it contradicts an emotional attachment to an alternative narrative. It is vital to recognize that the resurgence of this movement is a symptom of a larger technological shift. The rise of sophisticated editing software, the democratized nature of content creation, and the power of social media algorithms mean that a well-produced, misleading video can often reach more people than a dry, accurate scientific lecture. The aesthetic of the truth seeker, usually a person speaking directly into a camera, surrounded by screens of complex-looking data, framing themselves as the lone warrior against the establishment, is a powerful rhetorical device. It bypasses the traditional filters of peer review and credentialing, creating a parasocial relationship where the audience feels they are being let in on a secret that the rest of the world is too sheepish or too foolish to see. It feeds the ego, empowers the disillusioned, and provides a ready-made community for those feeling alienated by the rapid, often disorienting changes in our globalized society. However, we must also be careful not to fall into the trap of elitism. Simply labeling these individuals as stupid or lost does nothing to resolve the underlying issues that drive such movements. The goal of this documentary is to provide the tools for understanding why these ideas take root, to provide a clear, accessible breakdown of the physics that govern our reality, and to offer a path back to a shared understanding of the world. Science is not a belief system, it is a method. It is a conversation that humanity has been having with the universe, and the universe is a very persistent conversationalist. It does not care about our opinions, our biases, or our YouTube subscribers. It follows the laws of nature, whether we choose to recognize them or not. By returning to the basics, by performing our own thought experiments, and by looking at the world with fresh eyes, we can rediscover the breathtaking reality of the sphere we call home. We will take you into the field to show how optics work, how the atmosphere acts as a lens, and why, if you look at the world with the right tools, the truth becomes undeniable. We will bridge the gap between abstract equations and the physical sensation of standing on a planet that is hurtling through space at 67,000 miles per hour, yet feels perfectly still. It is a paradox of human perception that we don't feel the spin, and it is in that paradox that the seed of doubt is first planted. However, the lack of a sensory experience of motion is not the same as the absence of motion. We will bring in experts in classical mechanics to explain inertial frames of reference. We will look at how a fly in a moving train doesn't get squashed against the back window when the train travels at a constant velocity, and how that simple principle applies to our planet. The Earth isn't just a static object in a vacuum, it is a complex system of motion. By the time we finish this journey, the idea of a flat Earth will not just seem incorrect, it will seem physically impossible, a relic of an era that lacked the tools to see beyond the immediate horizon. But before we get to the physics, we must first look at how the sky itself dictates our reality, a topic that moves us away from the ground and toward the heavens, where the true nature of our planetary home is written in the movement of the stars and the light of the sun. It is there, in the celestial dance, that the story of the globe truly begins to unfold, revealing a beauty and a logic that a flat, frozen disk could never possess. The night sky is a silent, shifting archive. For the entirety of human history, it has served as our calendar, our compass, and our greatest mirror. If one stands in the northern hemisphere and looks toward the celestial North Pole, the stars appear to rotate in a counterclockwise circle around a single, fixed point, Polaris, the North Star. If you move toward the equator, that point sinks lower toward the horizon. If you cross the equator and enter the southern hemisphere, the North Star disappears entirely, hidden by the curve of the Earth, and you are greeted by an entirely different set of constellations, including the Crux, or the Southern Cross. This simple, elegant change in the stars is a fatal blow to the flat Earth model, which suggests that all people under the same dome should, in theory, see the same celestial theater. Yet, proponents often scramble to explain this with elaborate, unprovable theories about atmospheric magnifying glasses or complex light-bending projections, ignoring the simple reality that you can only see the southern sky if you are standing on the southern side of a globe. To understand why this is impossible on a disk, we must consider the geometry of perspective and the limits of the human eye. On a flat plane, if you were to stand in the middle of a vast, dark field with lights distributed across it, those lights would merely fade into the distance as you walked away from them. They would not vanish beneath a curvature, they would not be obstructed by a physical mass of rock and water. You would be able to see them as long as your telescope or camera had the power to resolve them. But the stars don't just fade, they disappear. They set. They are physically blocked by the mass of the planet. This isn't a matter of opinion or a subjective interpretation of a blurred image, it is a fundamental consequence of being positioned on a curved surface that rotates. If the Earth were flat, Polaris would be visible from anywhere on the disk, perhaps appearing lower in the sky the further you traveled from the center, but never vanishing, and certainly not being replaced by entirely different stars. We often talk about the stars as if they are static points of light, but in reality, they are massive, distant suns, and their positions are locked in a celestial grid that we have mapped for thousands of years. The precession of the equinoxes, the slight wobble of the Earth's axis over a cycle of 26,000 years, further confirms that we are a planet spinning in a dynamic, gravitational dance. This phenomenon is predictable to the second. Astronomers can tell you exactly where a star will be 100 years from now because we understand the math of a rotating sphere. If the Earth were a flat, stationary object, this math would collapse. There would be no axis, no wobble, and no logical explanation for why the star charts used by ancient mariners in the Mediterranean differ so drastically from those used by Polynesian navigators in the southern Pacific. The integration of these two hemispheres into a single, cohesive map of the cosmos is one of the greatest achievements of human observation, one that requires the Earth to be a globe in every possible iteration. But let us pivot to the Sun, the most dominant object in our sky. The flat Earth narrative often relies on the idea of a local sun, a small, nearby lamp that moves in a tight circle above the plane, illuminating only a portion of the disk at any given time. They call this the spotlight effect. It is a visually intuitive idea for those who haven't studied the way light interacts with the atmosphere. If the sun were a spotlight moving over a flat table, the light would change size as it moved toward and away from you, and the transition from day to night would look entirely different than it does. We see the sun set as a steady, consistent descent. Its angular size remains virtually constant as it touches the horizon. If it were truly moving away into the distance, it would shrink significantly, eventually becoming a tiny pinprick before vanishing. Instead, we observe it maintaining its scale, sinking behind the horizon line, which acts as a physical barrier. The bottom of the sun is obscured first, a direct consequence of the planet's curvature rising up to meet it. This leads us to the mystery of the twilight. During the transition from day to night, the sky remains illuminated for a period after the sun has vanished below the horizon. This is because the atmosphere is scattering sunlight that is still hitting the upper layers of our air, even though the surface is in shadow. On a flat Earth, you would have to explain how the light of a local, spotlight sun could continue to illuminate the sky in a way that perfectly matches the mathematical model of a setting sphere. You would need an atmosphere with impossibly specific, non-uniform refractive properties that just happen to mimic the exact behavior of a spherical world. It is the classic problem of the ad hoc hypothesis, adding layer upon layer of complex, unsubstantiated excuses to save a failing theory from the basic, observable facts. The beauty of the globe is that it requires no such gymnastics. The simple, elegant geometry of a sphere accounts for the sunset, the twilight, and the sunrise with one single, consistent set of physical rules. Consider the phenomenon of the lunar eclipse. In this event, the Earth passes directly between the Sun and the Moon, casting its shadow upon the lunar surface. We have observed thousands of these eclipses, and every single one displays the same characteristic, a curved, circular shadow. If the Earth were a flat disk, there would be times when the shadow cast would be an oval, a line, or a sliver, depending on the angle of the Sun and the Moon relative to the disk. We have never once observed a flat or linear shadow on the Moon. The only object in the solar system capable of consistently casting a round shadow from every conceivable angle is a sphere. This is not a modern discovery, it is an observation that has been documented by civilizations across the globe for millennia. Even if one were to argue that the object casting the shadow isn't the Earth, but some mysterious, invisible dark body, a common trope in flat Earth apologetics, they are left with the massive problem of explaining why this invisible body consistently moves in perfect synchronization with our planet's orbit. We must also address the Moon itself. When you look at the Moon from different latitudes, you see it from different angles. Someone in Australia sees a moon that is upside down relative to someone in North America. This is an impossible condition to satisfy on a flat plane. On a flat surface, everyone is looking at the same disk from the same relative perspective. You might change your distance to the Moon, but you wouldn't change the rotational orientation of its surface features. The fact that the man in the Moon, the pattern of the lunar Maria, appears rotated depending on your location is a definitive, physical proof of the curved surface beneath your feet. It is a detail that is often ignored, not because it is difficult to understand, but because it is impossible to explain away without abandoning the entire premise of the flat Earth. It requires the observer to be positioned on a curved surface that wraps around the world, physically changing the orientation of the view. Then there is the issue of the midnight sun, an observation made by those in the high latitudes of the Arctic and Antarctic. During the summer months, the sun does not set, it circles the horizon for 24 hours. On a globe, this is easily explained by the axial tilt of the planet toward the Sun. During the summer solstice, the North Pole is angled toward the Sun, meaning that even as the Earth rotates, the region remains within the Sun's light. For a flat earther, this is a nightmare to explain. How does a spotlight move in a circle that stays above the horizon for 24 hours? They often resort to claiming that the Sun's light simply bends in a way that keeps it visible. But if light bends in such a way, why doesn't it bend everywhere? Why does the Sun follow this specific, logical path only at the poles? The lack of consistency here is jarring. The globe model uses one set of rules, gravity, orbital mechanics, and axial tilt, to explain the behavior of the Sun everywhere, from the equator to the frozen wastes of the south. The persistence of the flat Earth belief in the face of these celestial proofs highlights a fascinating aspect of human cognition, the motivated reasoning trap. When a person adopts a belief that is tied to their identity, their brain begins to treat any evidence against that belief as a threat. They don't analyze the stars to learn about the universe, they analyze the stars to find a way to make them fit the narrative of the disk. They look for the one anomaly, the one piece of misinterpreted data, and they cling to it with the ferocity of someone defending their home. This is why you can show someone a photo of the curved Earth, and they will call it a composite or a lie. You can show them the math of the sunrise, and they will dismiss it as theory. The truth, however, is not a matter of consensus or social agreement, it is a matter of the objective reality that exists whether we acknowledge it or not. The Earth does not care if we believe in it, it continues its rotation, its orbit, and its celestial dance regardless of the skepticism of the observer. But why, we must ask, is there such a strong emotional pull to reject the globe? Perhaps it is because the globe makes us feel small. We are tiny, biological specks on a spinning rock, drifting through a near-infinite vacuum. That is a humbling, and for some, a terrifying reality. It suggests that our lives are fleeting, that our world is fragile, and that we are not the center of the grand design. A flat Earth, by contrast, centers the human experience. It makes us the focal point of a creation that was built specifically for us, complete with a dome to keep us safe and a sun that revolves around our needs. It is a psychological defense mechanism against the vastness of the cosmos. To accept the globe is to accept the discomfort of our own insignificance. It is a shift from the comforting story of a world designed for us to the objective, often cold, reality of a universe that simply exists, indifferent to our presence. As we look toward the next phase of our investigation, we must move beyond the celestial and return to the ground, but with a different set of tools. We have established that the sky, the sun, and the stars all point to a globe. Now, we must examine the very surface we walk on, specifically the ocean, the one feature that, more than any other, serves as the great leveler of our world. We will look at how the surface of the water acts as a witness to the curvature, through the simple act of surveying, the development of modern sea level measurements, and the undeniable reality of long-distance navigation. If the Earth were flat, the sea would be a vast, still lake. But the sea is an active, shifting, and deeply curved body of water, and the way it interacts with gravity is perhaps the most convincing evidence we have yet to explore. We are about to descend from the stars and look at the physics of the fluid world, where the gravity that holds our oceans to the planet also defines the very shape of our horizons. The study of water is the ultimate litmus test for any model of the world because water, by its very nature, is a fluid that seeks its own level under the influence of gravity. When we look at the vast, undulating surface of the world's oceans, we are looking at the largest barometer of our planet's true shape. Flat Earth proponents often argue that water always finds a level, and therefore, it must stay perfectly flat across any distance. They are half right. Water does indeed seek the lowest point available to it, which is the point closest to the center of mass. Because that center of mass is the heart of the Earth, the water is pulled inward from all sides, forming a continuous, curved shell. A level is not necessarily a flat line. In a gravitational system, a level is a surface that maintains a constant distance from the center of gravity. This is why when you look at a calm lake, the water seems level to your eye, but over miles of distance, the surface is imperceptibly sloping downward to follow the curvature of the world. If you were to take a long-distance surveying project, say across a massive inland sea or a quiet bay, and you attempted to measure the surface level using high-precision instruments, you would inevitably encounter the drop. Engineers who design massive suspension bridges, like the Verrazzano Narrows or the Humber Bridge, must account for the fact that the towers are further apart at the top than they are at the base. If they were to build them parallel to one another as if they were standing on a flat plane, the bridge would suffer from catastrophic structural misalignment. These engineers are not part of a global conspiracy, they are professionals working within the laws of physics to ensure that steel and concrete can support the weight of millions. They are building on a curve because the Earth demands it. To ignore this, as the flat Earth model requires, would be to build structures that would crumble under the tension of their own geometry. The behavior of water extends beyond our ability to measure it with tools. It is also visible in the way light interacts with it. Consider the way a harbor pilot views an approaching ship. They don't see the ship sliding into view as if it were on a long, flat tabletop. They see the mast first, then the superstructure, and finally, the hull. This phenomenon, which has been recorded for millennia by sailors who relied on these visual cues to survive, is only possible if the intervening space is curved. Proponents of a flat world often point to atmospheric refraction or the zoom function on modern cameras as proof that ships don't really disappear behind a curve. They argue that if you just have a powerful enough lens, you can bring the whole ship back into view. But this is a misunderstanding of what is actually happening. Yes, you can use a high-powered lens to see the top of a ship that is currently below the horizon, but you will never see the waterline itself. You are catching light that is being bent by the density gradients in the atmosphere, a trick of physics, but you are not overcoming the physical barrier of the planet's bulge. Let's look at the mathematics of this. If you are standing at the seaside with your eyes roughly 6 feet off the water, the horizon is about 3 miles away. If you then climb to the top of a lighthouse 100 feet high, the horizon pushes back to roughly 12 miles. This is a linear, predictable relationship that matches the formula for a sphere's radius perfectly. On a flat world, the horizon would be limited only by the clarity of the air and the resolving power of your vision. If you stood on a beach in Florida and looked toward Europe, you shouldn't see a horizon at all. You should just see a blurry line of infinite distance. But instead, you see a hard, defined edge that moves with you. This isn't a trick of the eye or a limitation of human sight. It is the boundary of our line of sight dictated by the Earth's mass. Every single movement you make upward or outward changes the geometry of your horizon, a dynamic shift that is impossible on a stationary, flat disk. Furthermore, we can observe the impact of the Earth's rotation on the movement of our oceans through the Coriolis effect. This is the phenomenon that causes large-scale weather systems and ocean currents to rotate in opposite directions in the northern and southern hemispheres. If the Earth were a flat, stationary disk, there would be no reason for a hurricane in the Atlantic to spin counterclockwise while a cyclone in the Indian Ocean spins clockwise. This rotation is caused by the different linear velocities at different latitudes as the Earth turns on its axis. Air and water moving toward the equator are deflected by the underlying motion of the planet. We see this verified daily in our weather maps, in the movement of ocean currents that facilitate global trade, and in the fundamental physics that our meteorologists use to predict the path of a storm. To deny the globe is to deny the existence of the very forces that define our climate, our trade routes, and the way our air circulates. Why do we find it so difficult to accept these large-scale truths? It comes down to the human scale of perception. We live in a world of rooms, cars, and streets. When we walk, the ground feels flat. When we swim, the pool feels horizontal. Our senses are evolved to navigate a local environment, not to measure the shape of a planetary body. The flat Earth argument is successful because it validates our limited, immediate experience. It tells us that our intuition is correct, even when the reality is far more complex. It is a seductive logic, but it is one that fails as soon as you step outside the bubble of your immediate perception. The moment you enter an airplane, you are entering a space where the globe is not just a theory, it is a necessity for travel. An airplane doesn't hover over a flat map. It navigates using an inertial reference system that calculates its position relative to a rotating, spherical coordinate system. Every flight path that cuts across the North Pole or connects distant southern cities is a triumph of spherical trigonometry. Think of the flight paths of long-haul air travel. A plane flying from Santiago to Sydney, for example, would be a wildly inefficient and illogical journey on a flat Earth model, where the distances between continents would be vastly stretched or compressed to force them onto a disk. On a globe, that flight path is a great circle route, the shortest distance between 2 points on a sphere. Pilots don't choose these routes because they look pretty on a map, they choose them because they minimize fuel consumption and travel time. If the world were a disk, the routes required to mimic the appearance of a sphere would burn an impossible amount of fuel, and the navigation computers, which are independent of any one government or airline, would have to be programmed with entirely different, non-existent physics. The fact that the global aviation industry operates on a unified model of a spherical Earth is perhaps the most quiet, yet most effective, form of proof in existence. Millions of people board these planes every day, trusting the reality of the globe to reach their destinations, never realizing that their safe landing is a silent affirmation of the planet's curvature. This brings us to the question of gravity, a force that flat earthers frequently reject in favor of density and buoyancy. They argue that things fall simply because they are heavier than air. But this ignores the most fundamental question: why do they fall in a specific direction? Why don't they fall to the side, or float aimlessly? Density explains why a rock falls through air but stays put in a bucket of water. It explains the relationship between two objects. But gravity provides the direction and the acceleration. Without a downward pull, a vector directed toward the center of mass, there is no such thing as down. Gravity is the invisible architect of our reality. It pulls the atmosphere toward the planet, holding our air in a dense, breathable shell. It pulls the oceans into a curve. It holds the moon in its orbit. The flat Earth alternative, which suggests that the disk is constantly accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second squared to simulate gravity, is a fantasy that creates even more problems. If the Earth were accelerating upward forever, we would have reached relativistic speeds long ago. It is a desperate, makeshift solution that falls apart under the slightest mathematical pressure. The rejection of gravity is a rejection of the Newtonian and Einsteinian universe, the very framework that gave us the Industrial Revolution, the space age, and the information technology we use to spread these debates. When someone claims gravity is a lie, they are claiming that everything from the simple pendulum to the orbit of Mercury is being misrepresented by a global conspiracy. But gravity is not a political opinion. It is a measurable, reproducible force that we can demonstrate in any lab with a torsion balance or a Cavendish experiment. You can measure the gravitational pull of lead balls in a basement and prove that mass attracts mass. You don't need a government grant or a NASA mission to prove it, you just need a quiet room and some patience. This is the tragedy of the modern, post-truth divide. People are choosing to walk away from the ability to verify reality themselves, preferring the comfort of a prepackaged theory that absolves them of the need to understand complex, uncomfortable truths. We must also address the persistence of the ice wall theory, the idea that the Antarctic is not a continent at the bottom of a globe, but a giant, encircling rim that holds the world's oceans in. This is a romantic image, perhaps influenced by fantasy literature or a misunderstanding of early polar exploration, but it is entirely contradicted by the reality of geography and exploration. We have had permanent research stations in Antarctica since the middle of the last century. Thousands of scientists, support staff, and tourists have traveled across the continent, flown over it, and trekked its interior. They have documented the movement of the sun, the unique wildlife, and the geography that is unmistakably that of a landmass, not an infinite barrier of ice. We have satellite data that shows the entire shape of the continent from above. To believe the ice wall exists, one would have to believe that every nation on Earth, nations that often cannot agree on trade, borders, or policy, has entered a secret, unbreakable pact to hide the edge of the world. It is a level of coordination that humanity is, quite frankly, not capable of. The reality of our world is not a limitation on our freedom, it is the stage upon which our freedom is enacted. Understanding the globe is the first step toward understanding our place in the universe. It is the beginning of a true, scientific curiosity that goes beyond the surface of what we see. We have touched on the sky, the water, and the ground, and in each instance, we have found that the laws of physics are not random obstacles, but the consistent, elegant rules of a vast and beautiful system. However, even as we see these truths, we have to look deeper into the mechanisms of the human mind that allow for such persistent, widespread denial. Why is it that in the face of such overwhelming evidence, the human capacity for doubt can be so easily weaponized? As we move toward the next part of our journey, we will step away from the physical world and into the archives of history and the laboratories of psychology to understand how the map of the globe was constructed, and why, for some, the very idea of a map is now considered an enemy of their own perceived truth. We will explore how the map is not just a tool for navigation, but a symbol of the world we have built together, and why that symbol has become the target of a profound, and ultimately unnecessary, cultural war. We must examine the specific tools of the skeptic. How does one actually construct a flat Earth narrative in the digital age? It isn't done with scientific papers or peer-reviewed journals, it is done with the cinematic language of the modern internet. Take, for instance, the prevalence of the fisheye argument. It is a staple of the movement's video output. A camera with a wide-angle lens, pointed toward the horizon from a high altitude, will naturally distort a straight line, bowing it into a curve. Proponents of a stationary, flat plane will seize on this single, distorted frame and hold it up as the smoking gun of deception. They argue that if the Earth were truly a globe, the horizon should always be a perfectly straight, horizontal line at eye level. By using this framing, they ignore the vast, multi-angle archive of photography that shows no such distortion, images from cockpit windows, standard non-wide-angle lenses, and high-altitude photography that show a consistently curved horizon. It is a masterclass in confirmation bias. Highlight the one image that fits the pre-existing belief and declare that all other contradictory images are fakes, CGI, or atmospheric trickery. This reliance on visual cherry-picking reveals a deeper misunderstanding of how optics and perception interact with reality. When you look at a photograph of a distant mountain, you aren't just seeing the mountain, you are seeing the light as it has traveled through miles of atmosphere. Dust, heat haze, and moisture all act as filters, changing the clarity and the edge definition of the object. When a flat earther claims that they can zoom in on a ship or a landmark that should be obscured by the curvature of the Earth, they are usually failing to account for the way light is refracted by the atmosphere. There is a phenomenon known as superior mirage or looming, where temperature inversions, layers of air with different densities, can actually bend light around the curve of the Earth. It acts like a natural magnifying glass, allowing an observer to see an object that is technically behind the horizon line. Instead of seeing this for what it is, a well-understood atmospheric effect, the skeptic interprets it as evidence that the horizon is an illusion and the Earth is perfectly flat. They mistake a rare, fleeting atmospheric anomaly for the standard state of the world. Furthermore, we need to address the cultural geography of this denial. Why are we seeing this rise in skepticism now, in the 21st century? It is not just about a lack of education, it is about the fragmentation of authority. For centuries, the map of the world was something handed down, an authoritative, finalized document. You trusted the cartographer, the captain, and the schoolteacher. Today, however, the authority of the map has been replaced by the authority of the algorithm. On platforms like YouTube, the recommendation engine doesn't prioritize the most accurate video, it prioritizes the most engaging one. A documentary that claims everything you know is a lie is infinitely more watchable, and more click-worthy, than a dry, factual breakdown of geodesic surveying. The flat Earth theory is perfectly suited for the engagement economy. It creates a us versus them dynamic, a conflict that fuels comments, shares, and watch time. The structure of the platform itself creates a feedback loop where the more you engage with doubt, the more the system provides you with even more extreme content, effectively building a silo of reality that no contrary fact can penetrate. This shift in how we process information has created what we might call a crisis of verification. In the past, if you wanted to test if the Earth was a globe, you had to physically go out and perform an experiment, measure the shadows, track the stars, or calculate the distance to the horizon. It required effort, time, and physical presence. Today, the research is done by scrolling. We have become disconnected from the tactile reality of the world, replacing it with a screen-mediated version. When you see a video on your phone, you don't feel the spin of the planet, you don't smell the air, you don't see the light interact with the horizon. You see a series of clips and hear a voiceover that tells you a story. The medium itself encourages a passive, intellectualized approach to truth that can be easily manipulated. It is much harder to lie to someone when they are standing on a beach with a sextant. It is incredibly easy to lie to someone when they are sitting on their couch, scrolling through a feed of curated conspiracies. Let's dig deeper into the concept of the official narrative. Flat earthers often argue that they are the true critical thinkers, the ones who question everything. But true critical thinking is not about rejecting everything, it is about evaluating evidence based on its weight and consistency. Consider the sheer number of industries that rely on a spherical Earth model. Look at global telecommunications. The fiber optic cables that run beneath the sea are laid out according to precise maps that account for the Earth's curvature. If the Earth were a flat disk, the geometry of these cables would be completely wrong, the lengths, the angles, and the connections between continents would not align. Or consider global finance. The entire system of international banking and logistics depends on the accuracy of weather reports, flight paths, and shipping routes, all of which are based on global data. Are these industries, spanning every country, ideology, and government on the planet, all coordinating to maintain a lie about the shape of the floor we stand on? The cost and complexity of such a conspiracy would be, in itself, the greatest scientific achievement in human history, far greater than the invention of the internet or the splitting of the atom. The irony, of course, is that the very technology that allows this movement to flourish, the satellite internet and the global positioning system, is the ultimate proof that the globe is real. Think about the way your GPS works. It calculates your position based on signals from a network of satellites orbiting the Earth at specific altitudes. These satellites move in precise, predictable arcs, and their clocks are calibrated to account for the time dilation predicted by Einstein's theories of relativity. If the Earth were a flat, stationary plane, these satellites would have no orbit to follow. They would have to be suspended by some impossible, invisible tether, and the math used to triangulate your location would simply return a not found error. Every time a delivery driver finds your house, every time an emergency responder locates a 911 call, and every time a drone follows a flight path to deliver a package, the system is silently confirming the spherical geometry of our world. The flat Earth movement is essentially biting the hand that feeds it, relying on the tools of a global, satellite-dependent infrastructure while simultaneously declaring that such an infrastructure cannot exist. This paradox extends to the history of navigation. For thousands of years, humans have traversed the oceans, guided by the stars and the math of the sphere. The Polynesian navigators, the Viking explorers, the merchants of the Silk Road, all of them had to account for the way the world curved. When you are on a ship in the middle of the Pacific, you are fundamentally in a different geometric reality than when you are on land. The way the sky shifts, the way the sun moves, the way the water behaves, these are not things you can ignore. There is an entire discipline of maritime navigation known as great circle sailing, which recognizes that the shortest path between 2 points on a sphere is not a straight line on a flat map, but a curved arc. Sailors have practiced this for centuries, long before the age of satellites. To argue that the world is flat is to erase the history of human exploration, to suggest that every captain, every sailor, and every navigator was either a fool or a conspirator. We also have to consider the role of scientific language in this debate. Proponents often use terms like density, buoyancy, and refraction to give their arguments a veneer of academic authority. They will talk about atmospheric pressure gradients and vector mechanics, yet they strip these terms of their actual, rigorous definitions. They treat physics like a buffet, taking the words that sound scientific while ignoring the fundamental laws, like gravity, that bind them into a coherent, working system. It is a form of pseudoscience that mimics the aesthetic of discovery without the burden of proof. They invite you to look at a bridge and say, "See? It looks flat, therefore it is." But a bridge is an object built to a specific curvature, it doesn't define the shape of the Earth. A bridge is a tiny structure on a massive sphere. Expecting a small bridge to display the curve of the entire planet is like expecting a drop of water to clearly show the curvature of the ocean. The scale is all wrong. By focusing on the local and the immediate, they blind themselves to the global and the infinite. The emotional weight of this denial is, perhaps, the most important part of the puzzle. When you tell someone they are living on a spinning ball in a vast, cold vacuum, you are confronting them with a reality that feels alien and impersonal. When you tell them they are living at the center of a stationary, flat plane with a dome overhead, you are giving them a sense of belonging, a feeling of being at the heart of the universe. It is a shift from the scientific to the mythic. We are seeing a regression, a return to the pre-scientific worldviews that sought to explain the cosmos through the lens of human experience. It is a story about comfort, not about truth. And that is why it is so difficult to counter with facts. Facts don't provide the same sense of identity and security that a myth does. You can provide all the data in the world, but you cannot use a calculator to dismantle a feeling. We are standing at a unique intersection of history. We have the most advanced tools for observation in the history of our species, yet we have a segment of society that chooses to ignore what those tools tell us. We have the ability to see the Earth from space, to calculate its mass, to map its magnetic field, and to predict the movement of every celestial body with incredible precision. Yet, we are witnessing a resurgence of a perspective that predates the invention of the telescope. This isn't just about the shape of the Earth, it is about the shape of our society. It is about how we value truth, how we define authority, and how we treat those who see the world through a different lens. As we move forward, we have to look past the arguments and into the very institutions that have made our modern, spherical understanding of the world possible. We will look at how the scientific method itself has been attacked, and why, for those who seek to undermine our shared reality, the very concept of a fact has become the enemy. The next step in our investigation will take us from the digital archives of the internet to the high-stakes world of aerospace, where the reality of the globe is not just a theory, but a daily, life or death requirement for every rocket, every satellite, and every human who dares to look up at the stars and dream of what lies beyond. The architecture of the aerospace industry is perhaps the most concrete manifestation of our commitment to a spherical reality. When a rocket clears the launch pad at Cape Canaveral, it is not merely ascending. It is executing a highly choreographed dance with the laws of orbital mechanics. The engineers who design these machines work with the fundamental understanding that the Earth is a rotating globe. They calculate the flight trajectory to take advantage of the Earth's rotational speed, which gives every rocket a free boost of nearly 1,000 miles per hour toward the east. If the world were a flat, stationary plane, this entire calculation would be an act of complete fantasy. Rocket scientists wouldn't be able to achieve orbit. They would be fighting against a non-existent force, trying to navigate a vacuum that shouldn't have the rotational energy they rely on to get their payloads into the stars. The success rate of modern rocketry, which has become routine, almost mundane, in our daily lives, is a continuous, high-speed testament to the accuracy of our global model. Consider the sheer complexity of the International Space Station, a marvel of international cooperation that serves as a permanent, orbiting laboratory. It completes an orbit around the Earth every 90 minutes. Its speed, its trajectory, and its communication with ground control are all predicated on a spherical geometry. The astronauts living there, looking out their portals at the curved edge of our world, are not participating in a theater production. They are conducting experiments in fluid dynamics, botany, and physics that are only possible in a microgravity environment. To argue that these people are actors on a soundstage is to ignore the physical, measurable reality that the ISS provides for our global telecommunications. It is not just about the pictures they take, It is about the reality of our signal latency, the way our ground-based stations track its movement across the sky, and the fact that we can point a telescope at the station itself and track it with our own backyard equipment. The persistence of the argument that the ISS is a fake is one of the more peculiar hallmarks of this denialist movement. It suggests a level of global deception that would require the absolute, lifelong silence of thousands of engineers, maintenance crews, and independent amateur observers. Think about the tracking. There are thousands of hobbyists around the world who use standard, commercially available optical tracking software to point their cameras at the ISS as it passes overhead. They see the exact object they expect to see, moving at the exact speed predicted by orbital mechanics. They are not NASA employees, they are private citizens with nothing to gain from a conspiracy. If the station were a projection or a holographic trick, these hobbyists would have uncovered it within a week. The fact that the station, and the hundreds of other satellites that cross the sky every night, remain exactly where the math says they should be, is the death knell for any model that relies on a stationary, dome-covered disk. Let's turn our attention to the concept of the Great Wall, the idea that space travel is restricted by an impassable firmament or a dome that prevents us from ever truly reaching the void. This narrative is frequently used to explain away the absence of live feeds or the supposed faking of lunar landings. But consider the perspective of the private aerospace sector, a rapidly growing industry that is entirely independent of historical governmental mandates. Companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Rocket Lab are in the business of launching satellites, cargo, and eventually, humans into space. They are driven by profit, competition, and the hard, cold reality of mission success. If there were a dome, they would have hit it by now. They have launched hundreds of rockets into the upper atmosphere and beyond. They have thousands of cameras mounted on their boosters, providing live, high-definition footage of the transition from the blue of our sky to the black of the vacuum. They have no incentive to participate in a 50-year-old government conspiracy. In fact, their competitive advantage relies on the total transparency of their success. When these boosters land back on Earth, often on automated, moving platforms in the middle of the ocean, they are performing a feat of incredible precision. The guidance systems they use are based on inertial navigation units, which calculate the rocket's position by constantly updating its location relative to a rotating, spherical coordinate system. If the world were flat, the math in these guidance computers would fail instantly. The rocket would not know where it was, it wouldn't know where the target was, and it would end up plummeting into the sea, costing hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. The fact that these boosters can land, time after time, with absolute pinpoint accuracy, is empirical proof that the computer's underlying model, the globe, is the correct one. It is a proof that is bought and paid for in real, hard currency. The skepticism of the moon landings, often cited as the ultimate, foundational lie that birthed the modern flat Earth movement, serves a specific psychological purpose. By framing the Apollo missions as a fabrication, the movement effectively delegitimizes the entire scientific endeavor of the last half-century. It turns the moon into a prop and the astronauts into villains. Yet, this ignores the tangible, physical evidence we have on the ground. We have lasers placed on the lunar surface during the Apollo missions that are still in use today. Observatories around the world bounce lasers off these reflectors to measure the exact distance to the moon. This is not an opinion, it is a routine, daily measurement that relies on the moon being exactly where orbital mechanics say it should be. The laser light travels to the moon, hits the reflector, and returns to Earth in the time calculated by the laws of a spherical, orbiting system. If the moon were a local light, or if it were under a dome, this experiment would not function for a single second. We must also confront the issue of the vacuum. Flat Earth proponents struggle to explain why our atmosphere doesn't leak out into the vacuum of space without a physical container. They envision the Earth like a bottle of air sitting in a giant, empty room. They assume that if there is a vacuum, the air must automatically rush to fill it, unless there is a physical barrier holding it back. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between gravity and pressure. Gravity is the container. It pulls the air molecules toward the center of the Earth, concentrating them near the surface, where the density is highest. As you ascend, the gravitational hold on the air molecules becomes slightly weaker, and the atmosphere thins out until it fades into the sparse, low-density environment of space. It is a gradient, not a boundary. There is no edge where the air stops, there is only a gradual thinning. The idea of a rigid dome is an archaic, pre-scientific way of visualizing a transition that is actually a smooth, physical reality governed by the strength of the Earth's gravitational field. This brings us to the fascinating topic of the Antarctic Treaty, a frequent point of contention for those who believe that the edges of our world are being guarded by military force. The treaty is, in reality, a remarkable document of international diplomacy that designates the continent as a scientific preserve, prohibiting military activity and resource extraction. It is a triumph of peaceful, cooperative international relations. But the conspiratorial mind sees the treaty as a pact of silence, a way to keep the public away from the ice wall. This misinterpretation is built on the idea that human institutions are inherently sinister. It assumes that because we have secrets, we must have this secret. But the sheer logistical reality of maintaining a guard around the entire, massive circumference of Antarctica, which, on a globe, is a circle of roughly 16,000 miles, is beyond the capability of any coalition of nations. It would require millions of people, constant surveillance, and an infinite supply of fuel, none of which is ever accounted for in the budgets or the logistics of any nation on Earth. What we are really seeing in this resistance to the globe is a clash of worldviews. On one side, we have the scientific worldview, which is based on the idea that reality is something we discover, something that exists outside of our own desires and intuitions. It is a worldview that acknowledges our insignificance and finds beauty in the complexity of the laws that govern the universe. On the other side, we have the human-centric worldview, which is based on the idea that the world was built for us, that our senses are the final authority, and that anything that contradicts our personal experience must be a deception. It is an understandable, deeply human desire to be the protagonist of the cosmic story. But this desire, when taken to the extreme, turns the world into a prison of our own subjective making. By rejecting the globe, one also rejects the vast, breathtaking scale of the universe, choosing instead to live in a smaller, safer, and more controllable environment. Yet, even within this debate, there is a glimmer of hope for a shared, objective reality. Many people who enter these movements do so because they are looking for answers, and they have lost faith in the institutions that usually provide them. They are searching for a sense of truth in a world that feels increasingly dishonest. While their conclusions are demonstrably incorrect, their impulse, to question, to verify, and to refuse to accept the status quo without investigation, is a healthy one. The tragedy is that this energy is being directed toward the wrong target. Instead of questioning the shape of the world, we should be using that critical lens to examine the systems that actually do harm, the corrupt, the exploitative, and the destructive. The globe is not the enemy of the human experience, it is the stage that makes it possible. As we move toward the final phase of our investigation, we will synthesize all these threads, the celestial, the nautical, the physical, and the psychological, to understand the full scope of this modern myth. We have looked at why the flat Earth persists, how it is constructed, and why it is so fundamentally at odds with the physical reality we inhabit. We have seen how the airplane, the satellite, and the rocket serve as silent, daily witnesses to the truth of the globe. But now, we must step back and ask the ultimate question: what happens to a society that chooses to abandon the pursuit of shared, verifiable truth? How do we rebuild the bridges of communication between those who see the world as a globe and those who see it as a disk? The final segment of our journey will take us into the future, exploring the implications of this digital, post-truth landscape, and why the defense of the globe is, ultimately, the defense of the shared, human project itself. It is a story not just about where we live, but about who we are, and what we choose to believe in a world that is spinning, whether we acknowledge it or not. The next step takes us to the horizon of our collective future, where the challenge is to reclaim the truth not just from the shadows of a flat, theoretical past, but from the uncertainty of a digital, fragmented present. The bridge between the world as it is and the world as it is perceived is built upon the fragile foundation of trust in institutional expertise. When that trust erodes, the entire edifice of public knowledge begins to show cracks. We have explored the physics of the globe, the mechanics of the horizon, and the celestial clockwork of the stars, but we must now address the sociological reality of why these hard, empirical truths are being rejected in favor of an outdated, non-scientific cosmology. This is not merely a debate over the shape of the planet, it is a manifestation of the profound epistemological divide that defines our century. When we lose the ability to agree on the shape of our own home, we lose the baseline required for any constructive political or social discourse. The movement we have dissected is the ultimate canary in the coal mine for our collective ability to discern objective fact from algorithmic distortion. Consider the role of the map in human history. For thousands of years, the map was a sacred, guarded instrument of power and trade. The shift from the Ptolemaic geocentric model to the Copernican heliocentric model was not just a scientific evolution, it was a societal earthquake that moved humanity from the center of the universe to a position of humble inclusion in a vast solar system. Today, we are witnessing an attempted, though ultimately futile, return to the pre-Copernican mindset. The modern flat Earth movement is an effort to retreat into a protected space where the human experience is once again the ultimate arbiter of truth. By rejecting the immense, intimidating scale of the solar system, the believer creates a world that is manageable, domestic, and centered entirely on their own observations. It is a psychological sanctuary, constructed from the rubble of distrust in institutions that, while imperfect, provide the only map we have for navigating the physical universe. The danger of this movement lies in its pedagogical contagion. When a parent, a teacher, or a prominent digital influencer promotes the idea that the globe is a lie, they are not just teaching a bad lesson about geography. They are training a generation to dismiss evidence that contradicts their preferred narrative. This is the death of scientific literacy. It suggests that if an experiment doesn't return the results you want, you don't adjust your theory, you simply declare the experiment fraudulent. This is the exact inverse of the scientific method, which requires us to subordinate our egos, our biases, and our desires to the reality dictated by the data. If we move toward a culture where truth is defined by the depth of our conviction rather than the rigor of our measurements, we lose the capacity to solve the real, existential challenges that lie ahead of us, from environmental management to deep space exploration. There is also a fascinating irony in the way this movement utilizes the very tools that define our modern scientific success. Proponents often use high-definition cameras, live-stream debates, and encrypted social media platforms to disseminate their views. These are the fruits of the scientific, mathematical, and engineering advancements that rely on the existence of a globe. The mobile phone in your hand is a marvel of quantum mechanics and orbital science. To use these devices to preach a philosophy that demands their own invalidation is a profound, if largely unacknowledged, cognitive dissonance. They are living in a house built by the laws of physics they claim to despise, while using the tools of that same construction to try and tear down the blueprints. This is the central tragedy of the post-truth era. We are so removed from the production of our own reality that we can no longer distinguish between the reality we depend on and the myths we create to comfort ourselves. We must look deeper into the architecture of this denial. It relies heavily on the Gish-Gallop A rhetorical technique that involves burying an opponent under a mountain of low-quality arguments, each one needing to be debunked in detail. By the time the scientist explains the physics of atmospheric refraction or the mechanics of inertial frames, the proponent has already moved on to the next absurdity. It is an exhausting, circular exercise that isn't intended to reach a conclusion, but to sow doubt. It is not about winning a debate, it is about keeping the audience in a state of perpetual uncertainty. In this state, the viewer stops looking for the truth and starts looking for the person who sounds most confident. The winner of the argument is not the one with the best data, but the one with the best performance. This is a crisis of verification. In our current digital environment, we have replaced the expert with the influencer. In the past, if you wanted to learn about astronomy, you listened to the astronomer. If you wanted to learn about navigation, you listened to the mariner. Today, we prioritize the charismatic voices that tell us what we want to hear. This is the democratization of opinion, but it has been mistaken for the democratization of fact. There is a fundamental difference between having the right to express an opinion and the right to define the nature of reality. The laws of the universe are not up for a popular vote. The gravity that binds us, the rotation that dictates our days, and the curvature that defines our horizon are indifferent to our debates. They are the constants of our existence, the bedrock upon which all of our human drama plays out. We have seen how the scientific community has struggled to address this rise in skepticism. By ignoring it, they were seen as elitist. By engaging with it, they were seen as participants in an ideological battle. The middle ground is the dissemination of the tools of proof. We do not need more debates, we need more observation. We need more people to look through telescopes, more people to understand the math of the triangle, and more people to step outside and realize that their own senses are only the beginning of their journey. The globe is not a secret to be uncovered, it is an invitation to look further, to climb higher, and to embrace the vast, uncomfortable, and breathtaking reality of our place in the cosmos. Consider the progress of our species. We have spent thousands of years moving from tribal, local perceptions toward a global, unified understanding of our home. This movement toward unity is the hallmark of human achievement. We have mapped the deep oceans, the highest peaks, and the most distant planets. We have unified the world through trade, technology, and empathy. The flat Earth narrative represents a regression to a more fractured, limited state of being. It tries to slice the world into a tiny, guarded disk, stripping away the connections we have built across the globe. We must ask ourselves if we are prepared to abandon the progress of the last half-millennium just to feel more secure in our limited, immediate surroundings. The beauty of science is that it is a self-correcting process. It does not require us to be infallible, it only requires us to be honest. When a new observation challenges an old theory, science evolves. It grows stronger, more precise, and more capable of capturing the true, complex nature of the universe. The Flat Earth movement is the opposite of this. It is a system that refuses to evolve, refusing to accept any information that might threaten its core. It is a static, rigid, and ultimately fragile construction that cannot survive the light of honest inquiry. It is a monument to the fear of the unknown, an attempt to build a wall around the infinite and call it home. We have come a long way from the ancient Greeks watching the shadow of the earth on the moon, yet the path remains the same. It is the path of observation, of measurement, and of the courage to let the truth lead us where it will, even if that truth makes us feel small. We are tiny, yes. We are temporary, yes, but we are also the only species we know of that has looked up at the stars and decided to understand them. That is the true nobility of the human experience. It is not found in the comfort of a dome, it is found in the challenge of the voyage. The future of our collective understanding depends on our ability to distinguish between the myths we create and the reality we share. We must teach the tools of critical thinking not just to win arguments, but to foster a genuine, curious engagement with the physical world. We must encourage the next generation to look at the horizon not as a boundary to be defended, but as a bridge to the rest of the world. We must nurture the spirit of discovery that led our ancestors to cross the oceans, not because they knew the world was round, but because they had the courage to find out. In the final assessment, the shape of the Earth is not the point. The point is the integrity of our inquiry. If we allow ourselves to be seduced by the comfort of a false, simplified world, we lose the drive to reach for the stars. We lose the drive to innovate, to explore, and to understand. We turn our backs on the hard, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying truth of our universe. But if we choose to embrace the globe, if we choose to accept the reality of our position in the cosmos, we open ourselves to a future that is as vast and as limitless as the universe itself. We are on a journey that has lasted for all of human history, and we have only just begun to see what lies beyond our immediate surroundings. The story of the globe is the story of our maturation as a species. It is the story of how we moved beyond our own limitations to see the larger, more complex truth of our home. It is a story that is still being written, in every calculation, every voyage, and every moment of wonder as we look up at the night sky. We are a part of a much larger, more incredible narrative than any single person could invent. We are the stewards of a fragile, beautiful, and clearly spherical planet, spinning through a universe of breathtaking scale. It is a privilege to exist here, and it is a responsibility to understand where here actually is. Our investigation has brought us to the edge of what we know, and the view is spectacular. From the curvature of the horizon to the predictable, rhythmic dance of the planets, we have found a consistency that reflects a reality far more profound than any conspiracy could capture. The truth is not hidden, it is out in the open, available to anyone who takes the time to look, to measure, and to think for themselves. The globe is not a cage, it is a canvas. It is the foundation of everything we have built and everything we hope to become. It is the physical manifestation of our collective commitment to a shared, objective reality that transcends our differences and unites us all on the surface of this small, precious world. As we look toward the horizon of our own potential, let us remember that the truth is always there, waiting to be rediscovered by whoever has the courage to look at it without the filter of fear or the blinders of ideology. We are a part of a vast, interconnected, and scientific reality that rewards those who seek to understand it. We are the explorers of our own existence, and the map we follow is drawn with the ink of observation and the logic of math. Let us continue this journey with open eyes and a clear understanding of the world beneath our feet. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the content, please remember to like the video, share with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for your support.